So for a few of my cosplays in the past, I have had the need to have guns as props. And I've painted up a couple, and they've ended up on the table for demonstration purposes at a few cons. And whenever they do, they tend to be one of the first things that people come up and play with, because there's something about toy guns that you just want to play with them. And a lot of people wonder how I got the paint job, how I get it to look as semi-realistic as I do, and generally the way that fashions. Now, these are just basic Nerf gun toys that I have done a couple of edits to and painted up, and this is going to be a brief tutorial to show you the basics of how I do that. So, this is what they're in theory going to look somewhat like when they're finished, and the actual guns that I'm going to show you that I'm painting are a shotgun that, as you can see, is already partly prepped, and we'll come back to that one once we've prepped the other one. And basic handgun. Don't know exactly what make this toy is supposed to be, but one of the things I'm going to do for this one is this one's got a removable magazine, and I'm going to try and keep the paint on this one as well so that you can use that for shoots if need be. Right, so let's get started. First things first, you want to sand them down. Wherever you've gotten these guns from, whether it's from a car boot sale, a thrift sale, your local toy store, wherever. And trust me, car boot sales and things like that are a godsend for this kind of thing. Rather than spending £15 or whatever for a Nerf gun, a toy gun, that kind of thing, you can bargain your way down to about £1. But they are going to have, from their previous paint job, they're going to have some kind of sealant, they're going to have some kind of varnish that is going to, if you paint directly onto it, your paint is just going to peel off and you're not going to have a very sturdy paint job. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sand them, whether hand sanding or with a mouse sander. This one is mostly already done with a mouse sander. If you look a bit closer, you can see where the paint has dulled a bit, where I've already taken some of the sanding to it. I'm just going to finish this off with a bit of hand sanding. So once your gun is sanded down, you've got the vast majority of the varnish off, which gives it a slightly rough feeling. This is actually what you want, because that's going to give the primer a better chance to stick to it. So for primer, I don't buy anything special. Literally buy one of the big cans of house paint primer, which we then decant into other bottles so that we get better use out of them, because as a lot of people find with paint cans, it is very hard to get the lid back on once you've already got it off. This way you get a much longer use out of them. So, prime the whole thing. Paint the entire thing white. Something to remember if it's something like the shotgun that I showed you earlier, if you want to be able to still break it, which in gun terms means pull it to pieces, something like the shotgun, if you want to do that, you're going to have to prime every part of it, because that is going to be visible when you are using it later on as part of whatever prop or shoot or whatever you're using it for. I was tempted to try and do that for this one, because this does have a magazine that slides. However, the problem with guns like that is that because the slide is so very close to the rest of the gun, every time you pull it back, it's going to strip paint off. So unfortunately, this is going to become a solid piece of plastic with no actual workings apart from the magazine coming out. So anyway, let's get priming. once all the primer is applied, as you can see, the guns are completely white, as the way they should look with primer, with one exception, and that is, as you can see, all fake guns, by every convention rule I've ever heard of, need to have some sort of bright tip, normally either orange or red. And with some guns, these come with, as it happens with this one, it pops off, so I took it off to make sure that it would not get too paint covered, and once I'm done I will slot that back on, and that is fine. I'll glue that in place when I'm done. I might actually paint the whole thing, and then with this one was slightly trickier, because with this gun, this was actually a full shotgun. And then I hacked down half the barrel with a junior hacksaw in previous to get the sort of length that I wanted, and the same with the back. I cut it down to where I wanted it, and then I covered it with a sheet of Warbler. If you have a look at one of our Warbler tutorials, that can teach you good things with that one. With my previous rifle, I actually used a piece of card. Both works equally well as long as you paint them, as long as you glue them down properly. So with this one, luckily the base of the gun itself is actually orange. So I just made sure that when I got down to this section, I am leaving a gap that is orange so that it can be seen and people are aware that it's not a real gun. Because that can get you in trouble, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so next thing we do before we start the actual paint is just do a quick check over, see if there's anything particularly rough spots, which shouldn't be the case, but sometimes you get a little bit of excess paint in places more so than you've realised, and it's sometimes worth giving it just a quick, very, very light buff with fine sandpaper so you don't strip all your primer back off again, just to make sure that when your next coat of paint is going on, it is going on smooth. So let's do that. Okay, so once you've gone over and got rid of any rough edges that you might have that might interfere with the later painting, it is time to start adding some colour. So if you have a particular gun that you're working from, for a particular cosplay, for something sort of detail, for example, the Dean Winchester gun that I have made previously, both has a pearl inlaid handle, so you can see where I've given it a pearlescent sheen. And it has detailing, which I have painted on rather than trying to engrave. So that is something to keep in mind. If you are building to a particular character, then you want to keep that in mind when you're painting what colours you want to go, particular colours you want to go where. I don't have anything particular in mind for these ones, so for the shotgun I am going to go similar to my rifle in that I'm going to have a wooden grip and stock, and the rest of it is going to be the metallic sections. And for this one I am going to do it as a dark gunmetal grey rather than a chrome colour, and I'm just going to mix up shades when I get that one, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a wooden inlay, both because this gun previously actually came with that as part of it and because I think it will look cool. So I am going to mix together my colours. I am literally just using acrylics for this. These are the local acrylics that I get from my hobbycraft, my local craft stores. There's nothing special about them. The only reason this is in a bigger tub for this one is because I go through a lot of silver and therefore I got the bigger tub. And I'm just going to have a palette up to one side, mix up the amount I want. Bear in mind, if you're wanting to do multiple layers for this, you're going to want to be able to recreate your colour, which can be tricky. So if it's something you're doing over a large area, sometimes it's best to buy the specific shade that you want rather than trying to mix it up. Otherwise it could be tricky playing match. So yeah, I'm going to start doing rough layers of paint. Here we go. Okay, so when you've layered up your base colour, as you can see, it's looking a lot more realistic gun now. But the main reason that it's not looking fully realistic is that currently it's got no depth of field, it's got no shadows, it's got no highlights, it's all one solid colour. So we're going to fix that, and that's going to help it bring it and make it look much more realistic both in person and in photos. So, first things first is we want to bring in the shadows. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use a technique called black washing. And what we do for that one is we just take a bit of the regular black acrylic paint that we used when we were painting, and we mix it up with some just generic base water. And the consistency you want to get to is you want to get it so that you get blackness remaining, but it's very translucent, and it's not overshadowing any previous colour on there, just darkening it down. So have an experiment with that one, with the ratios. I don't have a set ratio of how I do things, I just mix it up and then try it out on whatever base paper I'm using before I put it on straight on. So this is pretty much right for me. And you just want to cover all of your current surfaces in it, and it's going to sink into the cracks. It's going to sink into all of these little divots and things, and it's going to give a lot more shadow into them, and it's going to make them look much more realistic. And then after that has dried, which shouldn't take very long because of so much extra water in the paint, we're then going to move on to the highlights. So let's do that. Once you've done the black wash, you can see that all of these inset details are now quite a bit more defined, and the gun itself looks a bit grubbier, which as a general rule of thumb for realistic things makes them look more real, because if things exist in the real world, they get grimy. We're now going to do the other aspect of the real world, especially with guns, that if you're going to keep using them, they get used and therefore they get polished. So we are going to use a slightly lighter shade of silver than whatever it is you've used on the base gun, and we're going to put highlights along any raised areas where there might be wear and tear from sitting in a holster or getting cleaned. So anywhere where we've got a raised area, I'm just going to go along with a very thin brush and highlight it. Another way you can do this if you have a large area to do is called dry brushing. I'm going to go into that more because that's the technique that I use for highlighting wood, so we'll come back to that after we've done the silver detailing. A little bit of advice that I do have, when it comes to very thin brushes, what I use is actually a set of nail brushes for nail art, and they come anywhere from reasonable sized, the finger for comparison, to almost the size of 2 or 3 brushes, and they're absolutely tiny, and they can be very, very good for detailing. So if you're having trouble finding normal brushes with a good sort of thin, small set of things to use, recommend looking at nail brush sets, and they're not too expensive. They're pretty good to use. So let's detail. Quick note, something you may have noticed me doing during this is that on occasion I will put down a line of colour and then I will smudge it out with a finger, hence why I end up normally getting filthy by the end of this. And that's because sometimes the best way to get a line that looks slightly more realistic is to diffuse it out a little. because if you have just a straight bold line or something, it looks more cartoony, it looks more painted. Whereas if it's more spread out into part of the main colour, it starts to look a bit more worn and filled in and a bit more natural. Okay, on we go. So as you can see, with one side highlighted and the other not, it makes quite a lot of difference in showing wear and tear on a gun, giving it highlights and lowlights, and it looks a lot more realistic now. Before I switch over, do the other side and complete the gun, I'm going to show you what I meant by dry brushing on this wooden part here. So dry brushing is a technique you use when you load a small amount of paint onto your paintbrush and then wipe most of it off, and it gives a very rough, very organic look, and it's what I'm going to use to put sort of the veins in the wood to make it look more wood and less flat. So I'm going to pull out a bit of brown paint and then I'll show you the technique as I go. So with dry brushing, I tend to use a fan brush, which is a good stiff brush with a large space area on it and lots of it's a flat brush, and I will get paint on the brush and then literally scrape it out on the paper that I'm working with. So I've got almost all of the paint knocked off it. It's a lot less covered. Focus, never mind. And then you're effectively scratching over the paint that you've already done so that you get a almost vine effect. This is very good for wood effects. And you end up with this more layered, natural, you feel like you can see the veins, the cracks running in the wood, like so. And again, that gives it a bit of depth of field, makes it look worn, more used, and once you've got the final sealant on, that will shine up nicely. That's about it. As you can see, there is a lot of difference. I'm gonna finish off the other side, and then the last thing you want to do before you start using your guns on a day-to-day basis is you want to seal it. This is a spray sealant, and always use them outside so you've got good aeration, you're not going to poison and gas yourself to death. Or you can get brush-on varnishes if you prefer to get in all of the little details that way. And that will just provide a last level of protection because acrylics are water soluble, so the moisture in your hand and general wear and tear as well as outside weather will wear on it, and with a extra level of protection you'll be able to use your props for that much longer. If you do want extra info on some of the other things I've made, like the vine detailing for example on the gun that I showed you earlier in this video, give us a quick comment on this vid and I will look into making extra information about it. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope this is helpful. Give us a quick like, give us a comment. If you do make anything from this, please send us a picture. I would love to see what you come up with. And yeah, I'm gonna finish this off and talk to you guys later. Bye!